Everybody to an impromptu breaking news segment about the news about Figma and Adobe. In our previous YouTube channel, we came to you live almost a year and a half ago saying breaking news, Figma and Adobe. And today we have Figma and not Adobe. So I thought people would want to talk about that a little bit. I'll show you a couple of things that I have found online that will help explain this to people. But just a reminder, I don't work for Adobe. I don't work for Figma. I am doing the best I can to make sense of all of this. But let's think about what the ramifications of this might be. First, as always, I want to thank our Patreons for supporting the channel and my content. You can join for free or for paid at patreon.com/CXCC, which stands for Customer Experience, Customer Centricity. So first, let me get my screen cooking. And I know it's always a little bit funky when I share my screen in this system, but I want to show people some information that I found that'll answer some of the questions you may have. And again, I'm no expert, but put up some of your thoughts or your questions if you're watching this live. So this is me sharing my screen. And now let's go over to this. So for starters, I think some people have been wondering about that $1 billion. Did you hear that Adobe will have to pay Figma $1 billion American dollars in cash if this merger doesn't happen, which evidently it's not happening? And this is a link to the SEC filing, which is an American thing that you do related to the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is usually the overseeing body when companies go public or merge or things like that. So you can see in this filing under termination rights, it says both the company, which is going to be whatever company Adobe says they are, and Figma may terminate the merger agreement under certain specified circumstances, including if the mergers are not consummated by September 15th, 2023. Now that's a couple of months ago already. That's 3 months ago. Subject to 2 extensions of 3 months each in order to retain required approvals or clearances. So that would mean hypothetically they already had the extension of 3 months and they could have extended this another 3 months, but it looks like they knew well enough that postponing the inevitable another 3 months wasn't going to matter, and they might as well just call this off. So that's a little bit of the dates of this and why is this happening in mid-December 2023. Hi, Anna Lucia. This is just an impromptu discussion of the Adobe Figma thing as a breaking news segment. So then it says, if either the company or Figma terminates the merger agreement due to the failure of the closing to occur by the date, or due to a final non-appealable legal restraint in respect of antitrust law that makes illegal, prohibits or prevents the consummation of the mergers, and at the time of such termination. Okay, so there's a lot of words here and they're not going to be comfortable for everybody, but basically what they're saying here is if either company decides to call off this merger, not because they changed their mind, but because there is something regulatory going on, that due to American antitrust laws, which have to do with not forming or encouraging monopolies, if it looks like this is not going to be able to happen because of legal restraints around this, then, as you can see at the end of the paragraph, the company, Adobe, will be required to pay Figma a reverse termination fee of $1 billion in cash. So that is where that $1 billion comes from, and that brings us to some of the whys. Now, when you see the blog post from the CEO, again, we don't know everything that's going on, but to me, there's a couple of hints here. 15 months into the regulatory review process, Figma and Adobe no longer see a path toward regulatory approval of our proposed acquisition. So they're clearly saying what we saw in their contract or their SEC filing, it's not really their contract, which is that this is not going to get regulatory approval probably because of US antitrust laws. And we get another clue about that in this next paragraph. Figma and Adobe have reached a joint decision to end our pending acquisition. It's not the outcome we hoped for, but despite thousands of hours spent with regulators around the world detailing differences between our businesses. So remember to try, I'm no legal expert, but if you want to prove that this is not a monopoly and that Adobe is not going to have some sort of monopoly or unfair, that this is some sort of trust or whatever sort, you would have to prove that there are extensive differences between these businesses. So for example, when Apple bought, I think it was Nuance, and they got Siri along with it, that didn't create some sort of antitrust. Lots of companies have voice synthesis models and dictation systems and things like that. It was just Apple adding to what they do and what they offer. But here, Adobe is essentially buying a competitor in, even though there are a lot of prototyping software tools out there, there are very few that have any significant market share. Many of us think of Adobe XD, Figma, some people still think of Sketch, a couple of us still think of Acture, but in reality, there's very few with significant market share. It's like, hey, there's a million places to get a hamburger out there, but most of us think of, if you're in America, McDonald's, Burger King, maybe Carl's Jr. or Hardee's, and a couple of the other ones. But it's not like there are a zillion businesses here. You know, McDonald's probably couldn't buy Burger King. But again, I'm not a legal expert. So Figma says, despite trying to detail the differences between their businesses, their products, and the markets we serve, we don't see getting regulatory approval for this. And I find this very interesting because this is just my opinion, and you're welcome to disagree. And of course, if you agree or disagree, write it in the comments. Let's have some comments here. I don't see a huge difference between the markets they serve and the products and the businesses. Adobe XD and Figma are in many ways, not endless ways, but in many ways, direct competitors. Many of us thought that if Adobe bought Figma, they would get rid of one of those systems. They would either eventually shut down Figma or they would eventually shut down XD. And so these are not two products that can continue going on endlessly in parallel. Chances are they would have shut down one of them because there is, again, in my opinion, and I'm not a legal expert and I'm not a regulatory genius, but there's a definite overlap between the target markets for Adobe products and Figma. Many people who work in different types of design or areas of technology, even people in marketing might use these products. Product managers might use them, whether or not we want them to. So to me, the products play in a similar arena. The target markets have a lot of similarities, and I can see why they were probably not going to get regulatory approval. So that's a little bit about that from my perspective. And I guess my question is, what do you think? I am monitoring the live chat from YouTube, Twitch, and LinkedIn. So if you're watching live, I'd like to know what you think. Though, of course, it's optional for you to say anything, but I'm curious what people think and how they think it will affect their own work. Because when we did the breaking news a year and a half ago, saying that oh my gosh, these two companies are merging, or Adobe's acquiring Figma, or however you wanted to look at it. There were a lot of concerns about what would happen to Figma, given Adobe's history of either shutting down products or bringing them into the Creative Cloud and making them unaffordable for many people, whereas a lot of people started using Figma because there was a free or inexpensive tier, which allowed you to sail right in and adopt Figma. Adobe is not like that. You can't really sail right in too easily because then they want to start charging you monthly. Hi, Sam. Sam says, XD has been in maintenance mode for a while. No updates for ages. Yeah, obviously when a product is in what we call KTLO, keep the lights on, it's not a good sign. I personally thought that Adobe was more likely to shut down XD than to shut down Figma and grow XD, or to, shut down Figma and call it XD. I mean, no, keep Figma and call it XD. But yeah, obviously Adobe not continuing to build out XD and add features and functions to it certainly says a lot. The idea that they wanted to buy or merge with Figma in the first place tells us a lot about where Adobe was going to concentrate any efforts there. I mean, it seems easier to buy a company for $20 billion. Was that the number, everybody? Does anyone remember? I mean, is it really more cost effective to buy Figma at $20 billion than to try to create a better Adobe XD and compete against Figma? I think buying Figma or merging with them can make sense because you want not only the tool, but the workers and the customer base. But I never was really sure it was worth $20 billion. But again, I'm no economics expert. Ana Lucia says, to be honest, I'm somewhat relieved. Even if Adobe didn't shut down Figma in the end, well, they would impose their business model and it's not that affordable. Yeah, many people were afraid that Figma would become part of Creative Cloud, or even if it weren't, it would start to have a significant monthly fee. I think, Adobe customers more often are enterprise, corporate customers buying a lot of the Adobe suite for very high numbers. And then there's the rest of us who don't want to pay that. And so we're using alternative things. I left Adobe products many years ago. I've been using hashtag not sponsored. I've been using Affinity for those of you who are looking for an alternative. Again, hashtag not sponsored. I pay them. They don't pay me. My husband introduced me to the Affinity products and I like them a lot. And for wireframing and prototyping, I use Axure. Hashtag not sponsored. I pay them. They definitely don't pay me. I sometimes think they should, but they do not. But let's talk about something else. Figma is now going to get $1 billion in cash. There's a lot of things a company could do with that, right? And if you are going to try to improve your product and try to compete against Adobe, you now have $1 billion. And that's not $1 billion of loans or investor money that you're going to have to pay back. That is your money. Now, it looks like Figma has received 3 investments in the past. I'm just Googling this right now. No, 7 rounds of investment. Though it looks like the last one was in 2018. Is that really the case? So, I wonder what they will do with some of this money. I cannot see, let's see, how much funding did Figma get? Is that public knowledge? I don't know. It says they have 190 million in revenue, which is weird that someone thought they were worth 20 billion. Did anybody find, come on, where's all my researchers? Does anybody see how much money Figma got in investment? Because it would be interesting if they just buy out their investors. Or, so it looks in April 2020, Figma raised 50 million in Series D. Oh, wait, there's more here. Hold on. In April 2021, no. Where's the funding? Here it is. In June 2021, Figma raised 200 million in Series E. Now, a question that I always have when I see companies raising rounds and rounds and rounds of money, and again, I'm not an economics expert, is what's going on in your business that you need more investment to operate or grow. If Figma has $190 million in revenue, but it needs $200 million in investment, what's going on there? So it's interesting to think about what's going to happen with Figma, and clearly, or I can't say clearly, we don't know, but let's just say it appears that the investors would have been very happy with that sale because they would have gotten a wild amount of money based on the tens, hundreds of millions of dollars that they invested. Yeah, so that's a bunch of investors that don't get a payday and are still going to be looking for a payday. Figma also showed its cards in that they showed they're willing to be bought or do a merger or be acquired, or whatever language you want to use around it. Figma has shown that they're essentially up for sale. But who else would buy them other than Adobe? And that goes back to the point of what a small marketplace it ultimately is for design, wireframing, and prototyping tools. If Figma was one of the most popular systems on the planet, and they're making around $190 million in a year, okay, that sounds like a good amount of money. I didn't see what their profits were. Let's see. COD says, depending upon one tool for UI is not advisable. There's a lot of uncertainties in that space. IMO. So COD, what tools are you using and why? Anna Lucia says, I just checked. The total investment they got was $333 million over 7 rounds, 31 institutional investors and 12 angel investors. Right. So that's $333 million of money where people expect to get very often, but not always, at least 10 times that back. So what does Figma have to sell for investors to walk away with 10 times 333 million, which would be over 3 billion? Okay, then this probably has to sell for literally billions unless the investors are willing to walk away with less than 10 times their money. Just from my old Silicon Valley startup days, I remember hearing investors wanted 10x. That might not always be the case, but that could be what they're hoping for. And maybe with this, it would have been more than 10x, and that would have been a fantastic payday for the investors. So now Figma has $333 million of investor money, where investors are going to want some sort of return on that. They're not even making that much in revenue in a year, let alone profit. Did anybody find how much profit is Figma making in a year? Figma Profit 2022. They might not have to disclose that if they are or were a private company, unless that was in the SEC filing, which I didn't fully read. Let's see. Figma had 400 in revenue in 2022 and roughly 200 million in revenue in 2021. So Figma has some decent revenue. Yeah, so it's all very interesting. There's lots of questions of what will happen next. Is Figma still up for sale or looking for a merger or acquisition? Is this something Microsoft would want because they would want to move more into design? Interesting. So what will happen next? I don't know. Figma gets $1 billion to play with. And it'll be interesting to see what they do with that. Can they improve accessibility? Can they improve prototyping? Which competitor do they think they can make obsolete? A lot of people don't use Sketch anymore. Some of us still use Axure because nothing is like Axure other than Axure, in my opinion. Could Figma become Axure? Oh, you got $1 billion to play with and you don't have to give it to your investors? Maybe you now have budget to go back and do all the things that customers have been complaining about or requesting or begging for. Maybe you now have the budget to radically grow your company and get on all the things that will really make people even more loyal. Ana Lucia says, from what I remembered, they didn't want to sell back then, but 20 billion was too high to ignore. Those could just be words. Yeah, and depending upon how their company is structured and what influence the investors have, I didn't check how many investors have a seat on the board of directors. You know, if Adobe comes knocking with $20 billion, even if the co-founders might not want it, the investors might have seats on the board, and they might have been very compelling. Especially if the co-founders wanted to stay and Adobe found a place for them. But maybe when you're getting a payday like that, you don't want to stay. You're ready to retire and buy your own Caribbean island. So again, totally unknown, but so many interesting thoughts and questions about Figma. Anybody else having some thoughts about the Figma news that Adobe and Figma will not be merging, probably due to them never getting regulatory approval, and what might be next for each of them. Sam had pointed out earlier that Adobe seemed to have XD in maintenance mode or keep the lights on mode. I wonder if they will try to invest some of the $19 billion that they now don't need to pay and decide to make XD a real tough competitor to Figma, or will they keep it simple and low on features? These are all unknowns. This is our speculation today. So just a quick live stream to do a little speculation. Oops, I forgot to press record. So hopefully the stream is looking good today. But it will be archived on YouTube if you'd like to watch it later. I'll put it in the breaking news playlist. But yeah, I just wanted to jump on here and see what people were thinking or feeling. When the merger was announced, there were a lot of feelings. People were very worried, nervous, upset. Few people were cheering for it, though some did. So it'll be interesting now that this is not happening, and we'll have to see what happens in 2024 with the landscape of design-related tools. All right, I guess I will wind down the stream and just call this a breaking news shorty. But thanks to those who joined live or are watching it later in the YouTube archives. You can see it on the YouTube channel CX-CC, which stands for Customer Experience, Customer Centricity. And we'll see. We'll be live tomorrow with Dr. Nick doing our Q&A, Ask Us Anything. So hopefully we'll see you tomorrow at 3 p.m. Italy time. Other than that, I hope everybody has a great holiday season. And if I don't see you for our Tuesday shows, I'll see everybody in January when we start our webinar series back up again. So check it out at cxcc.to/events. Thanks, everybody, and happy prototyping in whatever tool you prefer.